Mr. President of the Konstantinos Karamanlis Foundation, Scientific Director of the Foundation, then I should say Mr. President of the Republic, Mr. Prime Minister, plural Prime Ministers. It's a great privilege and honor to have been invited here to reflect with you on democracy. Democracy was born in Greece 2,500 years ago. Democracy can be lost, as Greece knows. Democracy was reconquered in Greece 50 years ago, and it was of great inspiration to see the images of those days which re-established democracy in Greece. And we have seen how democracy, Greece, and the European Union, or the European community at the time, were intertwined. And that interplay is still very, very strong today. And I will address in a few moments the issue of democracy in the sense that we may lose it in ways that in the past were not really thought of, through inaccurate maintenance, through enemies created within, including within ourselves, that erode democracy, its functionality, its acceptance by citizens. But before that, allow me to say that it is a great moment for me too to participate in this tribute to the 50th anniversary of 1974. I always had close relationships with Greece, and over my short responsibility in government, a very intensive 1 year and a half, I worked very closely together with those at the time responsible for the Greek government, Mr. Lucas Papadimos first, and then Antonis Samaras. We had problems of a similar nature, and I saw at the time how hugely important it was for countries in the south of Europe, even though of different size and in not completely equal conditions at the time, to participate, can I say, in a pedagogical exercise vis-à-vis the north of Europe. Don't consider me presumptuous, but I believe that over time it is necessary that each part of Europe is fully aware of its strengths, but also of its weaknesses. And I would like in particular to mention 3 occasions in which, in November 2011, the moment when I was asked by the President of the Italian Republic to try to form a government after the resignation of Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, I believe in the month of November, I mentioned publicly Greece 3 times. Well, the first time was the most pedagogical one. I did not even mention the word Greece. But in Strasbourg, in November 2011, when I was generously invited by Chancellor Merkel and President Sarkozy jointly to meet with them after just having had the confidence vote by the Italian Parliament to discuss the Eurozone crisis, then we had the usual press conference, and having the President on my right and the Chancellor on my left and numerous journalists, and I being the weak guy in the club, coming from a country which had a very, very difficult financial situation, I politely reminded us all that the first difficulties with the euro and the discipline around the euro in Europe were not generated by southern European countries, but by France and Germany, because it was the two of them who in 2003, for the first time, violated the Stability Pact. Then, of course, I'm not saying that all the others are immune of any responsibility, but it was, I think, necessary to remind that we can all have problems, and the fact that the most powerful can handle their problems better does not mean that there cannot be a negative repercussion on the others. The second time that I mentioned Greece, in that case explicitly in those difficult days, was when I told several times to my fellow citizens in Italy, I do not want to go down the road of Greece. Not that I felt that we should divide our responsibility and our pathos, but I showed the case of Greece by telling Italians, I'm not going to ask for financial support from Europe or the IMF. I'm not going to host a troika in Rome. We will do all the necessary things ourselves. The situation was different, Greece and Italy. And in particular, if Italy had asked for support, we know that given the size of the country, most probably not even the IMF would have been able to provide the necessary finance. But I thought, this is domestic pedagogy, that we should go step by step through the measures that were to be taken and that eventually were taken through the decision of the Parliament and without external, can I say, oppression, because I think that the Troika was conceived very in an ill-wise manner. And the third reference I made to Greece, I remember it was once in a TV studio, again around November 2011, I said, Greece is the greatest success of the euro. People laughed at me, and people have been persecuting me for years for having said that. But I meant it, and I mean it still today. Euro not being a mere technicality, but euro being an act of adhesion by each of our countries to a specific way of running societies, economies, fiscal matters, monetary matters. And I have always been impressed including during those, can I say, tragic days for Greece, by the fact that all throughout, the Greek people wanted to stick to Europe, did not want to drift away alone, And through, by the way, including the referenda, it was shown by the Greek people that they felt attached to Europe and in particular to the single European currency. You, Greek people, gave all of us a powerful example of what the substance, the political and the historical substance of things is. And so Greece was at the time, and I would repeat today that Greece, thanks to many of you, is in such a better shape today that you were the best example of the success of the euro. Let me turn now to why I believe that democracy is in danger. This is why the book that was just published, a few months ago published, and that was kindly mentioned, is entitled Demagony. So unfortunately, I do not know modern Greek, but luckily enough, my mental categories stick with ancient Greek. And I thought that, first of all, I learned on the occasion that agony has at least 3 different meanings in Greece, but at any rate, in Greek, at any rate, I wanted to convey that if we do not put ourselves on the alert, we may lose democracy earlier than we think, because there is an agony of democracy. I'm not referring just to the possibility that Europe may, the European Union may succumb in a war, which is not to be excluded in an horizon of decades, I hope not years, but there is an inner erosion of democracy by its very players. And I was impressed, very impressed, by one sentence of Konstantinos Karamanlis, which I noted, when he said, there are times for nations which demand a moral uplift. I believe this moment is there now for Europe. Not that Europe has not made huge progress over its history, including recent history, but I have the real concern. We are not living ordinary times for Europe, and and there is really a possibility that our European democratic system might implode. Why do I say this? Well, since Greece returned to democracy and joined the European community, the European Union, we have seen the powerful interplay between membership of the EU and impulsion to further democratic developments, economic growth, etc., in a country. But silently, year after year, in most of our countries, in Europe, but can I say also in the US, and perhaps more vigorously, and in a rock-style way, comparative to our more modest deterioration in Europe, there is an erosion, I said. Why? Well, you are all politicians. I pretend I am not, but I have had some contacts with the political world over my life. This is a big concession I make. We are all politicians or close to politics, and we know that the problems that politicians have to deal with become more and more long-term problems as far as their solutions are concerned, and more international, sometimes continental, sometimes global. So what is needed of politics for it to be able to meet the demands of citizens is to proceed with a gradual widening of the horizon over space and over time to be able to cope with these issues. On the contrary, we know that democratic systems tend, because people have the habit of wanting to win elections rather than lose elections, don't know why, but this is normally the case, the horizon becomes narrower and narrower in the mindset of politicians, both in terms of time, short-termism, what matters is the next election, or if the election is 2 years from now, the next poll next week, and in terms of space, the localism, the nationalism, the rejection in many cases of the only solution possible, which is cross-border cooperation or integration. This is determining an agony of our democracies. I'm sure that the conference tomorrow will be much, much deeper and scientific on all of this, but there are several indicators: the degree of participation to the election, the degree of admiration of people for politicians, and so on and so forth. And this is bad for any democratic system, already at the national level, but it can be fatal for a democratic system at an integrated level. Why? Because if you think for a second of it, in order to believe in integration, to bet on integration, to make decisions compatible with integration, decision makers, politicians, have to have particularly a long-term view and a not strictly local or nationalistic view. So one needs to have pretty large shoulders at home to participate actively and productively in the handling, in the management, say, of the European Union. And the three prime ministers that I see here know very well, having been members of the European Council in their respective times, how difficult it is to get a vision of Europe and a decision on Europe without penalizing one's domestic country. So this, can I add a small bit of provocative consideration? In my view, I do not pretend this to be true, but in my strong opinion, those democratic systems which are suffering most in terms of malfunctioning of democracy and disservice made to their citizens are those constitutional systems which on paper on textbooks when we studied at the university. I'm speaking in front of somebody who has been professor of constitutional law and president of a republic, but still I dare to say that those countries which today are more powerless in front of problematic situations are the presidential republics, in my view, i.e. those countries where, by the very nature of the functioning of the system, the person who runs the government, the head of the executive power, the President of the Republic for the US or for France, has to have a very tough, consistent and bitter opposition, because that is part of the system. Whereas in our parliamentary republics, there is always the possibility, in cases of emergencies, in cases of huge national difficulties, for the President of the Republic, who has not been directly elected and is not the head of the executive power, to appoint somebody, Lucas Papadimos, or modestly myself, or others in other countries, or coalition agreements like we have often in Germany with great coalitions, could simply not be possible. And we see those two historic great democracies which are paralyzed and are internally divided in the confrontation between two mutually aggressively opposing blocs. When I say that if I borrow the words of your great predecessor, because here we have, and I pay tribute to them, the family and political successors to the great Konstantinos Karamanlis, if we borrow his words on which demand a moral uplift, well, I believe that Europe now needs this moral uplift, because if the political game in Europe continues to be done as it has been done for years and years, I'm afraid Europe will not be able to confront its huge challenges. I know that I say something which is not easily accepted, but if we look at the shortcomings, the inefficiencies, the delays, if we look at the problems that the various Enrico Letta report, Mario Draghi report, we are lucky in Europe that Italy produces a number of prime ministers with a certain rotation, so that those reports finger point real problems and come up with innovative and, I believe, realistic solutions. But they not always keep in mind that most of the problems to which they would like to find a remedy are simply caused by a residual of nationalism. Even when governments decide with great emphasis on historic advancements of European integration, it's very rare that they follow up concretely in terms of the behavior of their national administrations, etc., etc. The history of lack of progress in the in the single financial and capital market for Europe is very telling. So I think that we will have to reconsider, and I think all this could be done really changing the modality of doing politics in Europe, not necessarily changing the treaty, which I know is extremely awkward, but we are seeing so many distortions coming down from the most august body of the European Union, the European Council. We have seen Giscard and Schmidt. They did not only support Greece very effectively, but they invented the European Council, rightly so, because they wanted to give a strategic guidance to the European Union. It's a pity that with the financial crisis and other circumstances, the European Council has not just given strategic advice, strategic guidance. It has become the almost day-by-day decision makers. And what do you want to expect? They are the heads of governments. They have to keep in mind, even though they may have European interests in their visions, their domestic constituencies. And all this is filtering down at the lower level of the European institutions buildings. The Commission has become more nationally oriented than it used to be 20 or 30 years ago. All the institutions. And it's simply impossible to produce a Europe that needs to become stronger, able to resist aggressions of all sorts without having more ability to construct such a Europe. And I temper my concern by thinking that maybe we are entering a window of opportunity which bears great promises. I mean, if I want to be scared about Europe today and scare you, I would simply say have a look at the last 4 months of the life, the most recent 4 months of the life of Prime Minister Orban, for whom I have a certain degree of personal sympathy. But is he not, it's difficult to say this in Athens, is he not the Trojan horse of the enemies of the European Union? Ever since he became, on July 1st, rotating president of the Council of Ministers of the EU, he ventured into global politics in the name of the European Union without any mandate, presenting for the first time the appearance of a united foreign policy of the European Union, except that it was Orban's policy. And now he traveled to Tbilisi to give, pretendedly on behalf of the European Union, the blessing to the legality and good substance of the elections in Georgia. And can we have a Europe able to resist to attacks if we do not find, for example, a way to open a simple, delicate procedure for this person before the European Court of Justice? A country or a set of countries not totally open to defeat by the rest of the world must have some rules. So, but the window of opportunity for the positive vision of Europe, I find in the recent, I may surprise you, re-election of Ursula von der Leyen as President of the Commission. I know that some of you, certainly Prime Minister, had a big role in organizing all this. And I think she has a unique opportunity. She's now seen by all political observers as the most powerful person in political Europe. 5 years ago, she was put there because the European Council decided not to play by the game of the Spitzenkandidaten, and they decided, therefore, not for Manfred Weber, but for Ursula von der Leyen. But she was catapulted there by the joint will of the two most powerful governments in Europe, the German and the French. Since she has done quite a good job, many people believe, I too, in difficult circumstances, and she has made up a college of commissioners. None of them has comparable experience to her. She now has, I'm not sure it is a luck, but she has the coincidence of having in Berlin and Paris two not very powerful and influential on the rest of Europe governments. She will have to dialogue constantly with a President of the European Council, Prime Minister Costa, who was not there already at the beginning of her mandate, but is junior in terms of European institutions' life to her. And isn't this, and if not, when, the moment in which the Commission should be asked and should feel the imperative itself to take back not the powers that it does not have, but the powers that it has, and that all too often in recent periods she has exercised in a rather timid way, not to be unpleasant to this or that member state. So this is the moment in which the Commission could exercise its powers fully without inferiority complex, without inferiority complexes vis-à-vis the heads of governments. They have their role. The Commission has its role as well. This could, I believe, begin to set the ground for the preparation of a more effective Europe. Because this is necessarily the moment where Europe must make a remarkable series of steps ahead. And we feel the lack. And I again pay tribute to Greece, not only for the way in which you have overcome, especially in recent years, the extremely difficult legacy of the financial crisis, but also because, if I'm not wrong, your society is one of the very few in Europe which has not become as xenophobic, anti-migrant, nationalistic as many other countries have become. So you bring a wisdom of playing with democracy, and I'm sure that we should all ask ourselves, if we want Europe to be decently powerful, how have countries or federations achieved this over the centuries and over the years? Never without one or two wars, never without revolutions, never without blood. Should we wish this to be the way in order to put in place a decently forceful Europe? Maybe one day it will be necessary. But at least I think that the moment has come when citizens, but also businesses, should be slightly more demanding and more revolutionary. For example, what I don't like in the way in which the big business in Europe presents, for example, the outcome of the Draghi and Letta report, which I would subscribe almost 100%, they identify all the setbacks to integration. They should put pressure on the different national capitals, but their headline is invariably, the EU should wake up. The citizens, what impression can get? That it is Brussels which is keeping Europe from where it should be. Maybe Brussels, which makes mistake as well, like everybody, but it is largely the national capitals. I believe that we must ask of our politicians, if we want to get to that Europe, to be at least ready to make one sacrifice, not blood, but be ready to lose an election. Absurd? No. We are speaking here and listening here in the context of an important party, member of the most important political family in Europe right now, the EPP. I remember a German chancellor, Helmut Kohl. Many of you were on July 1st, 2017, in the European Parliament in Strasbourg for the first state funeral of the European Union, Helmut Kohl. He had reunified Germany. He was wise enough to be afraid, he himself, of a reunified Germany if it were the only European country with a strong currency. And so, contrary to what most of its citizens wanted, he put all the necessary pressure to have Europe go to the single currency, the euro. But in the elections of 1998 in Germany, he lost. Kohl lost to Gerhard Schröder, who at that time was ready to second the appetite of Germans to keep that only reason of pride that they had after World War II, the Deutsche Mark. So Kohl lost the elections, but he made an important part of Europe. It's not exactly the example that another distinguished European politician gave to all of us, David Cameron. Why do you laugh? Who rather than building a brick for the construction of Europe, took many bricks from the semi-finished building of the EU and tried to play the EU for his domestic political problems, hoping to improve his position in the Conservative Party. We all know how it ended. It's a pity that we do not have many Helmut Kohls with all the problems that such a gigantic personality may imply. But please devote a moment in your always hurried thoughts about governing Europe and governing your own country to the fact that we will not have a quantum leap towards the Europe we need and we say that we want without changing something. Thank you very much for your attention.